I'm going to ask our journalist, Cathy Vogan, who's also the executive producer of CN Live, and she's also been doing a hell of a job live tweeting this case, to come in now and to explain and report on what this testimony and cross-examination by Patrick Eller regarding the technical aspects of whether or not Assange tried to crack a computer and what exactly that meant. Cathy.
The best place to start is probably what Assange is actually accused of in the indictment. Assange agreed, first of all, these are accusations. Assange agreed to assist Manning in cracking a password hash stored on United States Department of Defense computers connected to the Secret Internet Protocol Network, CIPRNet, a United States government network used for classified documents and communications. The next part is this enabled Manning to log onto computers under a username. These are the allegations that did not belong to her, and that such measures would have made it more difficult for investigators to determine the source of the disclosures. So Eller was asked to look at the chat logs, right? Looking at the chat logs, Lewis said, what did you see there between Nathaniel Frank and nobody? So these were the two users. Nobody is chatting with Nathaniel Frank in the chat logs. That's allegedly Manning and Assange. But this conversation, which doesn't have much context, in fact, it offers no context about what the password was for, what computer it was going to be used on, if at all, and also whether the computer that it was going to be used on was in fact a government computer. According to Eller, there's nothing there in the chat logs that states that this was the intended purpose of this hash code. The other thing that comes out, and this is in re-examination, and I'm taking things out of context to try and paint a more coherent picture, because this was gradually drawn out throughout the day, especially with a very, very long showing off type of demonstration by Mr. Lewis, the prosecutor, of what he knew about encryption. And that was all a waste of time, as he found out. But this is a very important point that was made. It seems to have been established that nobody was, in fact, Chelsea Manning. However, it was never proved during the Manning trial or since that Nathaniel Frank was Julian Assange. Eller was asked if he had been asked to investigate who Nathaniel Frank actually was. And Eller said, no, I wasn't even asked. And he said, did you see any evidence that it was Julian Assange on the other end? And he said, no, I saw no evidence at all that it was Julian Assange on the other end of the chat. There is no forensic evidence or evidence in the actual chat itself that could indicate that this was Assange. And so it was asked by Mark Summers, who was the defense lawyer, well, why did you use Assange's name interchangeably in your report with Nathaniel Frank? And suddenly there was this gotcha moment with Eller, and he said, well, it was just assumed that it was him. Excuse me. Yes, I really shouldn't have assumed that. So that's a big question mark there. It makes this whole, the actual identities of the two people, it's, first of all, it's not clear what they're talking about, what it's for. And then it's not clear who's actually speaking on the other end with Manning. It might have been Ziggy. I don't know. I really don't know. But there is no proof that this Nathaniel Frank was Julian Assange on the other end. What was actually said was that a hash was provided. That is an encrypted password. To try and keep this non-technical, James Lewis did go into the whole process of how it's done. But what was actually said was that a hash was provided by Manning, and Nathaniel Frank, which I'm going to use from now on, said that they had rainbow tables to crack the hash. What's normally done is a password is encrypted into a hash format. What allegedly was the purpose of these rainbow tables, and there is another way, was to reverse engineer that process of encryption from a hash, and it was only a part of a hash, back into a plain text password. And the purpose was allegedly so that Manning could log into a computer under another identity, and so that it would be harder to detect who had done this. Now, Eller came through with compelling evidence that, first of all, there was another user account that was identified called, not sure if it was just called FTP or FTP user, that was identified by Megan Brown, FBI agent, as allegedly the user that Manning logged into in order to download these files anonymously. But Eller pointed out that Manning had to be logged into her computer under her own identity in order to get access to the defense information, the information that was on CIPRANet, that if she were logged into a computer as FTP user, there would be no access. The other thing that was incredibly important was that anything that happens on those computers, all of the information being stored on what was called the T drive, so that would be the online server, and Manning's on a local machine. So every access that was made to that information on the T drive was actually tracked. And the IP address of the individual computer that was used to access it, that means regardless of what the login was, it was the actual physical address of the computer that was in the logs. And Eller was asked if Manning knew this, and he said, yes, I believe she did. She knew that this would be tracked. Another really significant detail is that all of the Reykjavik 13, the Guantanamo files, the Afghan war logs, and the Iraq war logs were all downloaded already before this chat between nobody, Manning, and Nathaniel Frank, ? Took place. And so the only documents that were obtained after the chat log were the cables. The other thing is that under her own identity, logged in as Bradley.Manning at the time, that was how she could, only way that she could access these documents. And Manning had legal access. Manning had a top secret clearance, which it was argued by her lawyers in the trial that after she became emotionally distraught over personal issues, that perhaps this top secret clearance should have been revoked before she was sent off to Iraq. However, Manning did not access any top secret or deliver any top secret information whatsoever to Julian Assange, or if it were Julian Assange on that chat. It was WikiLeaks, really. I think that's the idea, that the prosecution wants to bring Julian Assange out of WikiLeaks as a single defendant in this case, as a single person who is culpable for all this, when in fact we know that there were other team members and various tasks that people looked after. It's still the case today. I think the important thing to remember, apart from the video games thing, which was suggested in the first week of extradition hearings, that was the purpose of this hash code, was to download films, video games, and music videos, because these were not allowed to be installed on soldiers' computers. So I'm not quite sure, it wasn't that clear to me. But what was very, very clear was Eller saying that there was no advantage to gaining anonymity, because there was no way that Manning could have accessed the documents anonymously. If the password had been cracked and this other user was logged into, that user didn't have access to the T drive.
The T drive is where the classified material is stored.
Exactly. That's where all of the classified material was stored. And and on the computer, whichever user it was, everything was tracked to the IP address, and it was easy to work out which soldier was on shift at the time and which one was actually likely to have done it. Although, and this was something that came out at Manning's trial, that there were a number of people who had access to Manning's computer, if memory serves, up to 5. different people. So I thought
But
at
she
the
did
time,
confess at the trial that
yes,
she did.
Manning confessed, but
Now, what about the role CD, the Linux CD?
okay, so that was another reason why the password wouldn't have needed to be cracked, because Manning had a CD with a Linux operating system on it, and the computer could have been booted up from the CD, and that would have bypassed the security, the username security. So Kronberg described 4 stages of getting the material off the T drive, and then preparing it, and then exfiltrating it is the word that was used, and then delivering it to WikiLeaks. So this is really the 3rd stage of exfiltration, and 3rd and 4th stage. 1 and 2, steps 1 and 2, getting the information could not have been done anonymously, ever. And 3 and 4, there was no need to be anonymous, because Manning had this CD that would enable the whole security system to be bypassed.
So the bottom line is, Julian Assange, first of all, the indictment says that they did not succeed in cracking this password. However, Lewis said to Eller on the stand, how do you know that they didn't succeed?
Yes,
you don't have the evidence, the government's evidence. But the indictment itself and the extradition request both state that they did not succeed.
Yeah.
But had they succeeded, it would not have helped Chelsea Manning, who had already delivered to WikiLeaks the Iraq and the Afghan files, would not have helped her get more classified information. And the indictment only alleges that it was done to help hide her identity, so that investigators could not find out who it was, which is a normal tactic of investigative journalism, which is to hide your source. There's nothing different from that than what any reporter does, especially in national security reporting, to hide the identity of your source. So that's all he was trying. That's all they're alleging he was doing in the indictment. And yet we've gone through this entire day of testimony on this highly technical and complex matter, and I'm not quite sure what Vanessa Barrett understood out of this or not, and what the point of it really was, what the defense was trying to say, and what the government was trying to say.
Well, I think the case is globally very weak. We had this long discussion about how that password might have been cracked. Eller said that at the time it would not have been possible to use brute force. That means taking a dictionary and going through every word. You just bombard. I think there wasn't the computing power back then. Lewis pointed to vulnerabilities back then with Microsoft software, and he went into a long explanation of how these vulnerabilities could have been exploited. Eller was looking like he wanted to say something for a long time, and I feel that Julian might have been giggling at the time, because after all that, Eller said, but there was a patch in 1999 that removed this vulnerability. So basically everything Lewis had said was irrelevant. I think what is really relevant is that they have just about nothing to hang around this actual chat between 2 people. We don't know what the password was for. We don't know if it was going to be used within the context, which kind of computer, or whether it was government computer or not. They are alleging that it was. And also, I think Eller demonstrated very clearly that cracking this password would be of no use whatsoever to maintaining anonymity or getting the classified information that she had access to. But anonymity was not possible, because she was on a system where the IP address, which is a unique address of your computer, was being recorded for every activity, so no matter the user. So I think that's really important, and I think that you cannot assume that Nathaniel Frank was Julian Assange. I think the government have really pulled the wool over everyone's eyes on that, even Patrick Eller, because he apologized and said, yes, I was assuming that. And you were saying, I think everyone thinks it was Julian, but actually there is no proof of
it's irrelevant,
that either.
though, because he didn't commit a crime. That's what they're saying, that he committed a crime trying to help her to crack the password. And from what I understand, she doesn't need a password to get the classified information that she's legally access to.
End of story. And she could have leaked top secret information, but she chose not to. And in fact, one of the things in the chat log the chat between these two people, Manning says these files have been sanitized. Now, what does that mean? That means that really damaging information, dangerous information had been removed already, excluded by Manning. And so it is also what we've seen from the people like John Goetz, for example, who talks about the rigorous redaction process. And we've also heard this outside of the court from Mark Davis, that it was an extremely rigorous, long redaction, meticulous redaction process engaged upon with all of the media partners together in a very professional manner. And that accounts for, until the next year when the password got leaked out, and we won't go into that, but that is given as an explanation of why their rigor in redacting, that was why nobody got hurt.